I'm going to show you how I install a magnetic snap. Obviously I'm just installing it on two little scraps of vinyl here, but I'll explain how I install it on purses and wallets and bags, and which way I install each side. So we basically have the magnetic snap here. We'll have the male side and the female side, and then we have the two back plates. I have two little scraps of vinyl here. They've both got some Decaville light on the back. I've got some little scraps of fusible fleece, but you can use some little scraps of foam as well if you wanted to, but these are optional. You don't actually have to use these if you don't want to. I've got some tape to cover the back of the prongs when they're done. I've got my seam ripper. I've got my pen to mark where I want to make the holes for the prongs. So first of all, you want to decide where it is that you want the placement to be, either from the pattern, or if you're making your own pattern, where you want the magnetic snaps to be placed. I go with the rule of thumb of I always place the male part of the connector on sort of the like if I'm doing a purse, I will place the male connector on the flap or the opening of the purse or the bag, so the part that is actually going to be taken away from the snap. I hope that makes sense. And I always put the female part of the connector onto the body of either the purse or the bag. So because it's a little bit bigger and it has a little bit more body to it, I always actually put that on the main structure of the bag, and then I put this part on where it will be removed from. So it will be this action. So if, like say, if I was doing it on say an NCW for argument's sake, this would be placed within the flap, and then this would be within the body, and then they would connect that way, and then the flap would open and the connector would open that way. And I just find that I have less problems with the connectors that way. Sometimes when the bigger part of the connector is on the flap, it can sort of pull at the fabric a little bit. So that's what I've found anyway, as I've had the best results with. So hopefully that's helpful for you. So this magnet is really strong and does not want to come apart. So we're basically going to pretend that this is our flat plate piece if we're installing it into a purse, and our markings to put the first part of the connector, which is going to be the male part of the connector, on. So following your pattern, you would decide where your connector was going to be placed, and you would literally place the back of the back plate down and draw two little marks within the back plate, so that you know where you're going to be making the opening for the prongs. And I use my seam ripper. You can use a craft knife for this as well. I just make two small slits. You want them to be basically the same size as the prongs, maybe it's a tiny little bit under. You don't want it to be any bigger. If you were using cotton, it would be a good idea to put a tiny little bit of fray check where those slits are, just to stop that fabric fraying. If the pattern isn't calling for any Decaville light to be on this pattern piece, adhere a little piece of Decaville light just where you're placing this magnetic snap, just to give it a little bit of extra strength and a little bit of extra stability. So just before we place our snap connector on, just between those two prong markings, I'm placing a little bit of glue. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I want this snap connector to have the maximum sort of adhesion possible to this fabric. I don't want it coming away at all. I don't want it pulling away from the fabric. I don't want it coming loose. So I just use a little bit of glue. This is the one that I use. This is my favourite one. There are others out there, but that is the one that I like. And yeah, so I just place that on and push those prongs through. I then like to either use another piece of Decaville or a piece of foam or a piece of fusible fleece. And all I'll do is mark holes exactly the same, push them through, and then place that over the back. This piece is actually probably a little bit big. You could get away with smaller, but it doesn't really matter. And then I push my prongs out over. Some people push them in over, some people push them out over. I just prefer out over, and I make them as flat as I can get them. And then what I always do is place some tape over the back. This stops the prongs from wearing through onto any lining. And it just gives a little bit extra level of protection. So that is the first side installed. So then you would move on to the other piece where the female part was going to be installed, and you would just repeat the process. So wherever the pattern showed you that it needed to be installed, you would literally mark the spot, use your seam ripper to make the holes, pop a little bit of glue. You don't need loads, you don't want it to be sort of pushing out from like underneath the snap connector. You just want enough just to give it a little bit of extra adhesion. I've totally missed the Decaville there. So obviously you would do this where the Decaville was. And then you would do the same with the fusible fleece. And then you would pop the back on, prongs out, and place the tape over the back. So you've got your male part and your female part, and where I've missed the Decaville on this side, where I've placed it a little bit too high, you can actually, I don't know whether it picks it up on the camera, but this is actually pulling away a little bit because there isn't the strength and stability where the Decaville would be. So it does really make a difference if just putting if it doesn't call for Decaville in the pattern, just putting a little scrap, just an inch square behind this connector on both sides will really increase the longevity of your snap connector. It'll increase the longevity of your bag or your purse and just make it much more hard wearing. So then your two pieces go together. So can you see there when I'm pulling this pattern, this away, it's definitely pulling from this piece where it doesn't have the Decaville. So it does just show that it is worth doing. But that is how you would install your magnetic snaps. I would, when I'm doing patterns that call for the snaps within like an enclosed flap, or where I'm going to need to top stitch near to where it's usually the male side is, what I will do is I will mark where I want it to be, and I will make the little slits with my seam ripper. I will then sew the flap together, turn it through, and then install the magnetic snap, because it just makes it easier to do the stitching and the top stitching without the magnetic snap in there. But it's easier to put the magnetic snap placement when it isn't sewn together. So that's a little tip, is to do your placement even if you're not putting the magnetic snap in until it's actually constructed. Put your placement in and mark it and make your holes before you actually get to the construction stage. It does make things a lot easier. So I hope you found that video helpful. I hope you have a lot of success in putting in your magnetic snaps, and I hope they last a very long time. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.